Truth.
Truth. Welcome to Trusting the Truth with Samuel Tolley, where we view the world through the lens of Jesus Christ. We do not view Jesus Christ through the lens of the world. Are you God's man? Are you a saved man? Weren't you called to righteousness and holiness? It's time to step up. All of God's men must step up. We've laid back for far too long. We've avoided the fight. Now the enemy is strong. The sidelines, they are gone. And the battle lines have been drawn. This is a battle that starts on our knees or on our face if he's so pleased. God didn't call women to lead. Many called to take a stand. To stand for our families, to stand for our land. Many called to illuminate the way. Darkness must flee in the light of day. Men dedicated to him and him alone. Men who garner strength from his mighty throne. Oh, my brothers, it's time to stand. And when we stand, it won't be alone. How you doing? This is Sam Tolley, and this is Manly Monday. And today, we're going to get into some deep stuff that we need to get into. We're going to talk about overcoming poverty and racism. Generally, in a topic like that, if somebody see a black man like me, they're going to assume off the top it's about racism and poverty of black people. Unfortunately, in the United States, has been my experience for a lot of people to think that black people are the only ones that go through those things. Well, I can assure you that everyone has went through poverty and degrees of racism at one time or another. Today, I'm bringing in a special guest of mine named Richard Okumoto. Richard and I grew up in Pasadena, California, and it was a unique relationship as far as the city at that time and the schools we went to, but maybe him and I will get into that. But I want to talk about the experiences that Richard had growing up, but before he grew up, the experiences that his parents and many people of Japanese ancestry had to go through. Slavery in the United States ended in 1865. But unfortunately, there's many Black Americans today that are still embedded with the, for lack of a better term, slave mentality, or they are beseeched with the idea that they are held back because of slavery. And many Black Americans don't understand, if you look through the course of history, every ethnic and racial group at one time or another has been exposed to it, has had to deal with it. And frankly, from my understanding, is that there's more slaves in Africa today than there has ever been. And yes, many Black Americans do not understand the fact that the slave trade, which came to the United States, would have never been possible without the cooperation of Africans willing to enslave other Africans in order to sell them to Europeans and Arabs and whomever. Barter. But it's gone on throughout history. But what I'm going to talk about today was a different kind of slavery, in my opinion. It's not a slavery in the sense that we're all accustomed to, and it's not bondage, whereas a people were subject to forced labor. But it was people, United States citizens, people who were born in this country were deprived of their Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights, who was taken away from the land that they were raised in, their property, everything. And yet, in spite of that, these people found the will to overcome. Let me show you a short clip uh, of the internment of the Japanese Americans before I bring in Richard.
World War II was the most important and most terrible event of the 20th century. It profoundly changed global economics, politics, and social relationships, and continues to influence the world we live in today. In the uncertain weeks after Pearl Harbor, as Japanese forces expanded dramatically across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, many Americans, particularly those on the Pacific coast, feared enemy attack and saw danger in every corner. These wartime fears, combined with racial prejudice, led to a great injustice. Early in 1942, civilian and military leaders on the West Coast complained that members of the region's large Japanese American community might be working with the Japanese military to plan acts of sabotage. Though no serious evidence of this existed, they pushed the Roosevelt administration for action. On February 19, 1942, FDR issued Executive Order 9066, which led to the forced relocation of more than 110,000 Japanese Americans living on the West Coast. They were confined to internment camps operated by the military. More than two-thirds of these people were native-born American citizens. Abruptly forced to abandon or sell their homes and businesses, many lost everything that they owned. Similar wartime fears led Canada and nations throughout Latin America to adopt comparable expulsion measures against residents of Japanese ancestry. Yet they remained loyal, and some Japanese Americans from the camps served in the nation's military, where they distinguished themselves with extraordinary valor in combat. The Supreme Court upheld the president's order in two wartime cases, but in the 1980s, the United States Congress acknowledged this violation of the civil liberties of American citizens and voted to provide some financial compensation to individuals who were confined to the camps. The Supreme Court also vacated its earlier wartime rulings.
Now, that little clip about distinguishing themselves during the war, you have no idea what Japanese Americans did during the war in a group called the 442nd, but we'll talk about that a little later. But before I bring in Richard, let me tell you a little bit about his resume. We spend the whole hour trying to read this thing, so I'm just going to jump over it lightly. I'll tell you this, that I went to elementary school and junior high school with Richard, and then he went to a different high school, Muir Mustangs. They were okay. And I went to Blair High School in Pasadena. But through the years, off and on, we got to see each other. Sometimes even people from Blair and Muir would socialize, and we bring in some people from PHS. But Richard, he obtained his BA from San Jose State. He got his MA from Gonzaga, a PhD from Queens Island University. Right now, he's working on his MBA. I guess, at 71 or 72, he still thinks he needs to learn some more stuff. He's been a Silicon Valley technological person for over 30 years. He's been in various boards and CFOs and CEOs, and it's just on and on. And on top of that, he's got a black belt in karate, and he learned how to fly an airplane. So I don't know. This guy, I guess he got too much time on his hand, but let me bring him on. How you doing, Richard?
I'm good, Sandy. I listen to that and I keep thinking, who is that guy? How many lives has he lived? And I don't believe a word that anything about his life.
Oh man. So I wanna bring a quote that you said to me.
Okay.
Before we can get going. He said, I have been slowly finishing mom's book where her uh, Ikigai, I believe, I hope that's pronounced it, the journey enabled me to survive living on the streets in 1986 to thriving in a world that viewed my parents and me as perpetual foreigners or visual immigrants of disdain. That's pretty tough. Um, but nevertheless, um, I understand. Well, bring us back to your parents' time, if you can. Let's start there.
Absolutely. Just a brief. By the way, my mom was just an amazing journalist. From the standpoint, she journaled. I've got a lot of her journals through the years. She maintained daily, as well as some materials. My parents were married in the war camps. By the way, they met in the war camps. Dad and mom met, courted, and were married within 30 days, and then ended up being married for 60 years thereafter.
Oh wow!
Yeah, their
So they
story,
married. They met in internment.
right? Both my
Okay.
s- both my sisters were born in an incarcerated situation behind fences and guards, sentries, and so forth. So it was interesting, and someday people will be able to read that in my book. By the way, the book someday will be it's called Jap Girl because that's what everybody called my mom. And as
Okay.
offensive as that is, I thought it was important to bring that to the forefront. But my mom was an all-American kid. She grew up here in Gardena, Southern California, went to Gardena High School, grew up on a chicken farm, which they lost. My dad, although born in Loomis farming country, was sent back to Japan to be raised in Hiroshima, then came
Mhm.
back to the United States because his father had passed away. And so he was doing farming and some other things. And so they
Wait, wait,
just
wait,
grew up.
wait, wait. So slow down, Richard.
Sure.
You said
Sorry.
your father was sent back to Hiroshima. We're talking about after the
Before
war.
before the war.
Oh, before the war. Oh,
Right.
okay.
So my dad was sent back to Hiroshima. Let's see, my dad was born about 1914, 1915. So he was sent back there in 1919 to be raised because his my grandmother, my dad's mother died of the Spanish flu in 1918.
Okay.
So his dad sent him back to Japan to be raised by his grandmother. And then he came back to here in the States in about 1933, I think this was the year. So he's an American citizen. I mean, he was
Mm.
born here, mom was born here. And so they were just inking their way through, and they, quite frankly, were doing quite well. I mean, my mom's parents owned about 5 acres in downtown, what is now downtown Gardena. They lost all that. Dad lost their businesses. They lost all that when they were incarcerated. They had 4 days to 7 days to sell everything, move everything, and take with.
4 to 7 days.
That's it.
It's like, how are you going to liquidate your stuff or even try to find somebody to try to preserve it? Well, of course, you don't even know at that point if
Right.
what's going to happen with you or how long it's going to happen with you.
And so everybody was buying things for pennies on the dollars, as you can imagine, because they knew the Japanese people had to sell their land, had to sell whatever they had. And so whatever they worked for essentially was gone.
I heard, and maybe you know better than me, but for some reason, I recollect somebody telling me that back in those days, many people were living toward the beach area, and the beach area was not an area that folks cared about being around.
Absolutely. Very hard to grow. There's a place called Crystal Cove, which is just south of Newport Beach. I was walking down there one day and along the coast. There was an actual sign out that talked about the Japanese flower growers are out there that took the rugged land around Laguna Beach, converted it, and all that land was farmed by the Japanese.
Mhm.
Can you imagine now owning that land in Crystal Cove or Newport Beach by the Japanese? That's all gone. They
Well,
lost all
that's what I was just thinking. I was saying, if all the, if society was, I guess they were going toward the cities and whatnot, and nobody cared about the beach. I know we were growing. It was like, let me get to the beach,
that.
and
Exactly.
and beachfront property is just like through the roof. It's like I said, the value would be tremendous.
It's funny, Samuel. I ran some numbers just because I'm sometimes a numbers guy, and the value of the property that was pretty much sold for pennies on the dollars back in 1942 was about 400 million in 1942 dollars. I looked at the land and the stuff that was sold, and I ran some numbers, and I came up with that land right now would be worth somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30 to 35 billion dollars.
Hmm.
So that's just in the California land. I didn't
Right.
consider anything else. So yeah, it was a time, and there's no question. Uh, my parents spent about 3.5 years behind wires, you know, and for for my dad, it was very weird because he had come back to what he considered his home, and he's back
Mm.
here for a number of years, and he's thrown into this. He's incarcerated. With my mom, this is all she knew. She grew up an all-American kid, going to high school, playing sports, and then she's 19, and the next thing she knows, she's in a war camp.
When she's
So
19, that's when it
she,
happened.
when she was
Wow.
19, so I mean, and the crazy part about it is when they got out, here they are, and nobody will rent them a house. They spent the first winter in Utah with relatives, but then they came to Pasadena because this is where my dad's sister, my aunt, was living at the time. And so they lived in a two-bedroom house over on Yale Street, um, which was, as you know, it's about 2 blocks from the Pepper Street projects.
Right. Yale Street was when it
Short.
went from Fair Oaks to Sunset, I
Yep.
believe. That's about all it was.
Yep. 60 L Streets where my parents bought their first house finally, but it was only because a German couple would sell it to them. They were trying to rent, and nobody would rent them a house. They'd go to, in my mom's notes, she said, we would go to a house, show that we were Americans, and we'd have our 2 daughters with us, and people would turn them down. And they said, oh, the people would say, oh, we can't rent you because you have kids. Then they would walk in and watch other people that were white with kids get the house after them.
You know what's amazing, and I meant to bring this up when I started, but I didn't. Um, People seem to forget, or don't, or just I don't know, cognizance blindness that at World War II we're fighting Italy and Germany at the same time.
Right.
So they didn't inter any Italian Americans or German Americans. And the last I can remember, Eisenhower's name is German. You know,
Eisenhower, yeah,
so it was purely a racial thing based on look.
exactly.
They talk about, oh well, the East Coast. Well, how far is Hawaii? Hawaii is a long way from Japan, and Hawaii is definitely a long way from the West Coast of California. But yeah, it was just it
It was
it
crazy.
settled the sensibilities of folks that didn't want to think rationally or
Well, and you hit it. It was all down to the visual. That's one of the reasons why I've sort of coined the term, that we were visual immigrants in the eyes of America, and that won't change. And in fact, you'll see that in the tagline of my mom's book. But it's true. I mean, I'll jump forward to high school. In high school, I never went to the prom at John Muir. I'm not sure how much I missed or grad night, because I asked out this one girl who was Caucasian, who was white, and her parents conveyed to me this term, which always stuck in my mind at 17 years old. They told me, Richard, you may be an American citizen, but you'll never be an American, and you'll never date my daughter.
hmm,
So that hit me at 17. I'm not. I'm pretty sure that's because I looked Asian. I looked different. So I'm
yeah.
not sure what else I could have placed that on.
By
But
the way, if you didn't
mhm.
know, in my senior year at Blair, we did not have a prom because we didn't raise any money for the seniors when we were juniors. So they didn't let us have one at all.
Hey, well, I got to tell you, it was. I don't know what it was like, but we had one at Muir because you know how those guys are, man. The Mustangs were. I didn't want to say anything. I'll never say anything bad about Blair because a lot of my buddies from Washington Junior High went there.
Go Bears. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
but no. And so my parents lived this life. I mean, it was amazing. They were wherever they went. They were. Have you discussed the term redlining in real estate?
Yes.
So my parents were redlined out of a lot of areas, and so my dad, because he was a smart guy, smart farmer,
Yeah,
what he
for those
wanted.
that don't know, redlining is where they weren't going to let different ethnic groups in certain areas. And it became, I forgot when it became written illegal, but they would try to keep people separated. And
Right,
mostly it was white areas where they didn't want anybody else over there.
exactly.
So, yeah.
And with 5 kids, my grandparents lived with us, so we were looking for a larger home at one point, and We ended up moving down to Fair Oaks down by Mountain Street, if you remember that
Okay.
area. So I was actually born in the Fair Oaks house just after they moved out of Yale. So I was just right around the corner there by a mountain in Fair Oaks. Later on, uh, my dad, because he was a smart guy, found a place in sort of on the borderline of Altadena up by Raymond, closer to Woodbury, and it's a vacant lot. And excuse me. And what happened was is that it was zoned commercial. So my dad was running a nursery at the time and doing gardening. So he went to the owner and says, "Hey, I'd like to build a nursery up here." And the guy said, "Oh, you're gonna build a nursery? That's fine." And because we were redlined out of that area to live. Uh,
Mm.
so my dad said, "Yeah." So they bought the land, and my dad thought, "Well, I'm just going to build a home here." It infuriated all the neighbors. By the way, they moved out. So that's how we ended up living over on Raymond there for a while.
And
So
let me interject this. When we were kids in Pasadena, I remember, like I mentioned to you before, when we were kids, most of the actually, I just remember seeing Asian landscapers. I didn't
yep.
see any whites, Hispanics, black, nothing. They were just all Asians. And then in my school, I saw the Asian kids, and I'm not just talking about Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans, whatever. They were we were all in the same class. We had a unique experience, I think, in Washington Elementary
Right.
because we were just kids and we liked each other. It didn't matter. We weren't hung up on the adult stuff,
Right.
uh, you know. But I noticed at that point in time, the majority, if not all, of the landscapers I saw were Asians, and then I saw their kids excel in school.
Yep.
When many times I was acting like an idiot, through nobody's fault but my own. But now, today, I see predominantly, if not always, Hispanic landscapers, and where I live, and when I was in Pasadena. So I think sometimes people, this is, if you're segregated, not of your own desire, you got to use whatever entrepreneurial skills you can to to move ahead, and then you can advance your next generation. If you're stagnated for whatever reason that you can't help, I believe in this country, even with all her warts and problems and difficulties. What it says in the Declaration of Independence, that we were endowed by our Creator with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think if we pursue it, we can get out of this country what we put into it. And it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but
Yeah.
but we can get it. Go ahead, Richard.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, it's crazy because I think back on those days. That's the only job my dad could get, quite frankly, too. That was another thing. You're right. It was a way for them to make a living. My mom cleaned homes, by the way, so she was a domestic, and because that's all she could get at the time. And dad did gardening, and there were the Japanese Gardening Association back then was huge. I mean, it was huge. Everybody's dad I knew pretty much was a gardener. One or two sort of luckily had gotten jobs, but I mean, I knew some parents that their parents had engineering degrees and they were gardeners. That's all they could get, and so it was a lot of that. I'd hate to say discrimination, but yeah, it was a lot of discrimination. They just weren't being hired by anyone. I knew parents that had gone to Berkeley, had gone to other schools, good schools, and they couldn't get jobs, regular jobs. So they ended up doing gardening and became good friends with my dad, obviously, because there was a very close knit society, partly because of the camps, the war camps. A lot of them knew each other from the war camps, and having lived through that, I think brought a special sort of connectedness with them.
Now there was a camp I believe called Manzanar. I think was that one in Northern California.
Manzanar is Northern California, just on the way to Mount Whitney off the 395. Yeah.
And did was Santa Anita made into a camp?
Santa Anita is what they called a relocation center. When they signed in February 19th of 1942, they hadn't built all the final camps yet. And so they had to put people somewhere. So they wanted to move them quickly. And so
Mhm.
they built what they call relocation centers. And the relocation centers were primarily racetracks, fairgrounds, things that they could convert quickly. And then from there, the occupants like my parents were up at Tulare County Fairgrounds in Central California. They shipped them there. They were there for about 4 months, 3 to 4 months. And then somewhere around August and September of 1942, the other camps were sort of built, and they started moving people to what we call the permanent camps per se. Yeah. So that's the differentiation. The relocation center is temporary, and then they moved them to the final camps.
That's an amazing situation, to be placed in this situation where you have no control. You've been stripped of your rights.
Right.
You don't have to consider yourself an American. You're just as much American as any Mexican American that was born there, or Polish American, or Black American, or anybody. And all of a sudden, you're nobody, and then you're confronted with the situation because of the ancestry home did what they did. But a lot of people, and I think this is a good time for me to throw in this little short video on the 442nd. A lot of people don't have any idea about what Japanese American soldiers did in World War II. I mean, it's just like, some people, I think more people now know about the Tuskegee Airmen, the 99th and the 332nd. But let me run this little short 2-minute clip on the 442nd.
Okay.
Did you know that after the U.S. joined the Second World War, a total of 18,000 Japanese Americans volunteered to fight for the U.S. Army? Their many acts of bravery and heroism made them one of the most decorated combat units in United States history. In the wake of the attack on Pearl Harbor by Imperial Japan in December 1941, anti-Japanese sentiment in the United States was rapidly escalating. Fearing that Japanese American citizens posed a threat to the nation, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the imprisonment of approximately 120,000 men, women, and children in internment camps across the country. Reclassified as enemy aliens by the armed forces, they were barred from entering the U.S. military. As the war expanded and more soldiers were needed, rules on recruitment were relaxed, and approximately 10,000 Japanese American volunteers from Hawaii and 12,000 from the mainland signed up to fight with the 442nd Unit. The majority were Nisei, second-generation Japanese American citizens. The 442nd Regiment Combat Team, a segregated unit under the command of white officers, merged with the 100th Infantry Battalion. Feeling that they were fighting a war on multiple fronts, in the battlefields of Europe and against racism back home, they adopted the rallying cry, "Go for broke," and distinguished themselves during 8 hard-fought campaigns in Italy, Germany, and France. During the course of the war, they earned 14,000 awards, including more than 4,000 Purple Hearts, 4,000 Bronze Stars, 21 Medals of Honor, and 7 Presidential Unit citations for extraordinary heroism. Nicknamed the Purple Heart Brigade, the 442nd remains the most decorated unit for its size and length of service in the history of the U.S. military. Why do you think Nisei soldiers were eager to fight when their loyalty was under suspicion and their families suffered racism at home?
Man, that's something else. I mean, wow. I mean, no group won as many medals. I mean, 21 medals of honor. That's just we're talking about just 18,000 dudes.
It was amazing. It's a sort of point of reference too. I had a number of uncles from Hawaii that were part of the 100th Battalion. Excuse me, the first battalion that went, the 100th Battalion that went to merge with the 442nd.
Okay.
Roy and some others. My dad was too old at that point in time to be in the Army, but a lot of people didn't realize they reinstated the draft in 1944. And so if you were an American citizen of Japanese ancestry, you got drafted. And some of the individuals didn't want to go, so they spent time in state penitentiaries, were incarcerated, in regular prisons. Others, volunteered. A couple of my uncles, like Uncle Ted, went with the 442nd. But talking about Ted, you remember Teddy Chino?
I'm sorry.
You remember Teddy Chino?
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
grew up.
I haven't talked to him in about a year or two, but yeah, I talked to Chad.
So here's a quick side note. Teddy Chino's dad was part of the 442nd. He was a sergeant in
Oh,
Company L. There was a famous battle called the Lost Battalion.
okay.
Everybody they sent in the first. I think it was the first battalion, which was made of Texans, were caught. They went into a battle. The Germans surrounded them, and they couldn't get out. And the Germans were just punishing this battalion because they were the Texas Battalion, as they were called.
Okay.
They sent in a couple of groups in there. Nobody could get them out. One of the generals, I think it was Dahlquist, sent in the 442nd, figuring, hey, we don't care about the 442nd. They
Mm,
sent the 442nd out. They sustained heavy casualties. I think in the L unit, there's 100 soldiers that went in. 4 of them walked out of there.
wow.
One of the 4 was Teddy Chino's dad.
Wow. Ted's dead. Now Ted didn't tell me that story.
Yeah, Ted's
But
his father he was a hardcore. I remember him, but he was one of the 4 guys that walked out of that battle. And
mm,
1962, Governor Conley in Texas mandated that any members of the 442nd were honorary Texans
mm.
because of that.
Now, honorary Texans, huh? Yeah, them Texans, they think they special anyway, but
I know, but yeah,
that's okay. That's all right. I would take that. I would take that.
so that's just kind of an aside on the 442nd. It's and you're right, they're just an amazing group, and there's a nonprofit here in LA called Go for Broke.
Yeah, I seen the movie, but it doesn't do it justice.
Oh no, yeah, it's
You
amazing.
know, I mean, when you look at the historical aspects of it, and the fact of it is, people questioning your loyalty to your country is the only country you know. I mean,
Right,
you know, that's why when I get around some black people and see, you know, a lot of people like to call themselves African Americans. I don't. I'm not going to argue with nobody. If that's what you want to call yourself, fine.
right.
I'm an American. You know, I'll go as far as I'm an American of African descent. But I was born here. My parents were born here. My grandparents were born here. Um, I'm an American, and people love to say, "What Americans a nation of immigrants?" Okay, well, you know, they were at one time. I mean, we didn't come off the Mayflower; we came from someplace else, but it doesn't matter. We're all here. We're all one group of people, and we should be united under one flag. And a lot of us found out that when they got past, I guess after Truman's integrated the military. Um, by Vietnam and everything else, when you're out there in the battlefield, you don't care what color that person is next to you. That's your brother because you're looking for him to keep you alive, just like he's looking for you to keep you alive. So none of that other nonsense matters at all. It's about what we can do together, and it bothers me that this country, in many respects, people want to segment us and separate us and break us up. Yes, we should acknowledge the wrongs. I'm one of these people that were totally against removing statues of people, because a lot of folks don't realize when you remove statues, particularly of folks that did something stupid or wrong or whatever at that point in time, and they acknowledge themselves to who they were, then it's easier to change history. And future generations could start reading the history that didn't exist, and they'll start
Right.
believing the lie. So leave it, the good, the bad, the ugly, our warts, our good pieces, our bad pieces. That's just all part of who we were or who we are. And then you can show it the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's some things that we see when people are trying to rewrite history, when they destroy what is history, good or bad, they essentially are trying to rewrite it, and that doesn't do us any good because, quite frankly, that history helps us understand what not to do or what to do in the future. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And by destroying that, they're starting a different discourse, and it's just crazy, and and that's why when you talked about the Japanese experience, it's imagine if you will, my parents were these days first born here. They're sitting there fighting for their country, and like right now we honor the Gold Star parents, whether who's have kids in the war. To put sort of additional sort of craziness to this, my grandparents that were Issei they were born in Japan. They could not be naturalized citizens here until the year that Samuel, you and I were born,
Mm,
until 1952.
wow.
Japanese that were born in Japan here for almost their lifetimes, for many of them, could never be naturalized citizens until 1952, until the year that we were born.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, as crazy as it when you think about it. They were excluded from the early, basically, doctrines of citizenship. And what people don't realize, part of what we talked about slavery. I'll take you back to about 1918, the Treaty of Versailles, which was after World War One.
Right.
The Japanese at that point were actually part of the Allied forces. They
Okay.
were actually participating to help Britain and Australia and the U.S. actually win World War One. And when the Japanese delegates came to the Treaty of Versailles, all they asked for was one paragraph to include Asian Americans, not so much just as equals per se, because they knew that would be pushing it too hard, but they actually said at least that we could be viewed as equals. That one paragraph was stopped by the US and by Britain and by Australia.
Hmm.
And it creates such bitterness in the Asian community that some believe, historians believe, that that might have been the reason that pushed them over to become part of the Axis powers as they look forward. So we talk about racism, and it's not a current thing. It's, as you mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
in your podcast, it's been there for people of color for a long time. But it's something we all have to be proud of. I mean, 1947. You think of baseball, who do you think of?
What? Jackie Robinson?
Number 42. And
Yeah.
so, as you're working right now, I sometimes work with the Asian kids. By the way, for many of you who don't know it, we had a double whammy because when I was 10 years old in 1962, my dad was crippled in an auto accident. So
Hmm.
my mom's there with 5 kids, and what do we do next, right? Because he
You
can't
say
work.
62?
62. I was 10
You're
years old at
10
the
years
time.
old. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were in 5th grade together, man, and life kind of changed. Um, so that's why junior high school was okay, but high school, that's a whole nother story.
Hmm.
But back in the situation was, you look at this and you kind of go, this racism's been there for a long time. So you think of 47, you think of Jackie Robinson, great baseball player, right? First person of color really to be in baseball. I try to basically raise this awareness with Asian kids too, because I say, you guys, nothing's been brought up about you guys to help you guys. Because I ask people, I ask you on the show, who was the first person of color to play in pro basketball? Prior the NBA, which prior to the NBA was the BBA. But who do you think was the first person of color to play in pro basketball?
That I can't answer.
Everybody goes to 1950. I think I forgot his name, Earl, who was a black basketball player then. And I mentioned to him that because my dad and mom had spent my 1 year of the post-war in Salt Lake City. I said it was a Japanese guy named Walt Masaka. I think it's Masaka. Walt, a Japanese guy at 5'7" in 1947.
5'7".
5'7" was the first person of color, non-white, to play in pro basketball. He was
Wow.
Japanese. And everybody looks at me like, Okumoto, you're lying. I go, no. Look up what, I think it's Masaka. He's the first basically non-white professional basketball player. And he was
Hmm.
Japanese at 5'7". So it's getting back to what you're mentioning, really. If we're going to get out of this overcoming poverty, and we grew up poor. Can you imagine your father not working? He's there. He's crippled. He's just driving everybody crazy because he's basically agitated, and drugs kind of drove him out of his mind a bit. If you can imagine, you lose track of who you are, and that's what I try to impress upon everyone. Look at the people that came before you. Look at the people around you now. They didn't come from perfect backgrounds. They didn't come from ideal situations. They came from something inside of them that drove them because they wanted to do better. They didn't want to live the lives they're living right now. And so I'm hoping that more of that message will get out, and that, yeah, we really have to be proud of ourselves, and not just this week because it's Black History Month or Asian History Month, but it's every day of our lives. So
Yeah.
that's something I'm hoping that will come across. That this takes every day. And my mom I really look at my mom more so. And it's not that my dad was a president, but he was, going through a tough time, with his legs being crippled.
Hmm.
But it was every day. I mean, there was one movie that was a turning point in my mom's life, which is ironic, saying my mom's life. Her favorite movie star was Spencer Tracy.
Spencer Tracy.
Spencer
Okay.
Tracy. When she was growing up, she saw his movies, Our Town and all this other stuff, and just the ordinary guy. but he made a great movie. His last movie was in 1969. He, by the way, passed away slightly before the movie was released, and he passed away on my birthday, June 10th.
Oh.
And my mom knew there was a message there. So when she reunited or reconnected with her high school best friend, they went to go see that movie in 1969. It was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
I thought that was 67.
60. Well, I know.
Well,
I had
whatever.
it released in 69. Of course, all I remember back then for me was it was The Graduate, it was the movie Barbarella, and it was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. So somewhere in there, the dates were good. But my mom.
Yeah, I'm fully familiar with the movie.
So my mom told me something, and this was in 1973 when I was going to graduate San Jose State. So I'd gone to school during the summers. I wanted to make sure I graduated in 4 years. And I picked a degree that I knew I could get a job in, which was accounting. And she said to me in 73, that summer, the last summer I was at home, she said, whatever you do, I've watched you. You'll be the first generation, our first generation to graduate college, and the second child in our family to graduate college. And she goes, whatever you do, she goes, I don't want you to come back to these small minds that have degraded you, oppressed you. She goes, I want you to go forward and build on your successes or accomplishments. And I said, well, okay. And so she said, and I want you to do that the rest of your life. And so I just, being a kid, I asked her, I said, well, what made you think of that? She goes, when I saw the movie, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, I realized at that point in time that Sidney Poitier had accomplished all these things. And so that when there became a question of him marrying, at that point, it was Hepburn and Spencer's movie daughter.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that would come into question would be race. My mom told me something, and this was in 1973 when I was going to graduate San Jose State. So I'd gone to school during the summers. I wanted to make sure I graduated in 4 years. And I picked a degree that I knew I could get a job in, which was accounting. And she said to me in 73, that summer, the last summer I was at home, she said, whatever you do, I've watched you. You'll be the first generation, our first generation to graduate college, and the second child in our family to graduate college. And she goes, whatever you do, she goes, I don't want you to come back to these small minds that have degraded you, oppressed you. She goes, I want you to go forward and build on your successes or accomplishments. And I said, well, okay. And so she said, and I want you to do that the rest of your life. And so I just, being a kid, I asked her, I said, well, what made you think of that? She goes, when I saw the movie, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, I realized at that point in time that Sidney Poitier had accomplished all these things. And so that when there became a question of him marrying, at that point, it was Hepburn and Spencer's movie daughter.
Mhm.
The only thing that would come into question would be race. So there would be no other questions. And
Right.
so my mom instilled in me, she goes, if you do all these things, whatever comes down to the decision you've been accepted or assimilated will be race. And then you'll know, and you'll know how to deal with it.
Mm.
And so she said, that's what I want you to do. And so when you're going through my background, that's actually the ikigai that she placed on her purpose in life, was to make sure that I was a lifelong learner and that I could build up these accomplishments. And she,
Now, your mom was her. How do you pronounce her name?
it's, see, this is an interesting part of the book. It's spelled Tome.
Right.
Tommy. Her American given name was Mary. They gave that to her later.
Okay.
But Tommy in Japanese means stop, because she was the fifth child, which became the fourth child. It was a girl, and her parents wanted a son. Finally got one.
Because
But
you put her quote in there. You must look beyond what you can see.
she told me that when she had polio, her father told her. My mom had polio in the early days,
Okay.
and her foster parents. She was adopted. She was one of 9 children, but adopted out, so raised as an only child. Her father told her, and my mom told me this. She goes, "You must look beyond what you cannot see, and what you first thought may be impossible, you must achieve." And she says, "You can." She goes, "That's the vision that I want you to always keep in your mind. Don't be satisfied with what is. Be satisfied with what can be, what may be, what is
Mm.
possible." So she beat that into my brain because I was a child,
Wow.
and she did a great job. And later on, which is ironic about that, Samuel, is Tomi in Japanese means, stop, Tome. On her, when she passed away in 2004, I was at the Mountain View, mortuary right up, up in Altadena, and I run into a gentleman there.
Okay.
And he asked me, he said, "Oh, what are you here for?" I said, "I'm just, just here to see where my mom was, because we cremated her there." He said, "What was her name?" I said, "Tommy." He said, "How do you spell that?" Tome. And he looked at me in puzzlement. He goes, "Well, that's a tomb. Why would anybody, name a child a tomb?" And then I walked away thinking about that, and I realized tomb, Tommy, spelt the same. I realized at that point my mom was just like any other mom. She was part of a large scholarly work, a tomb. And so she represented what every mother does, where they sacrifice in silence. And what stuck in my mind after that was that all mothers sacrifice in silence to
Mm.
basically to give their next generation their dreams, to extend dreams to their next generation, which is their kids. And ironically, the person that helped me think through that a little bit was Dashiell Smith. You know Dashiell.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I know Dashiell.
So
Wow.
Dashiell said to me one day, he goes, "I remember when your mom, helped me, taught me how to do sushi when I was over at your house." I was laughing. I said, "Really, Dashiell? I don't remember that." He goes, "Yeah, your mom was like all moms." That's what hit me when I heard the word tomb. I thought, tomb is a scholarly work. And so my mom was the scholarly work of motherhood. And she was like all mothers anywhere. And that's what made us all universal.
Mm.
And that's where my mom used to come up with the idea. She goes, what I wanted to give you an ikigai, which is a Japanese term for purpose. She goes, my purpose was to support your dad and guide my children, the 5 of us.
Hold on 1 second. I got one more little short clip
Okay, great.
on Ikigai.
Hold on.
Let's
Ikigai is a Japanese concept that first originated on the island of Okinawa. On this island, there are more people over the age of 100 than any other part of the world. That's why sometimes they call it the land of the immortals. The word Ikigai itself is made up of 2 Japanese terms, Iki, meaning life, and Gai, meaning value. Basically, to find your Ikigai, you need to ask yourself these 4 questions. What do I love doing? What am I good at? What can I get paid for? And what does the world need? And this is the one that we always overlook. The goal of finding your Ikigai is to get the perfect balance of these 4 elements. I'm betting for the most part, we're only able to do 2 or 3 of these at the same time. Filling in what's missing can give your life more meaning and happiness. And hopefully, live like an immortal.
I just like to try to bring out, if I can, a little information to help people understand what are you talking about.
And that was a great line. And by the way, we did not plan this, everyone. This was all impromptu. So Samuel's done an excellent job, prepping this. An ikigai, and that's what my mom found. By the way, found her ikigai while she was in camp. She
Okay.
was laying in the infirmary. My second sister was born there. She's August 23rd. She was born about 17 days after the atomic bomb was dropped in Hiroshima.
Mm.
So imagine you're in an infirmary in a war camp, incarcerated. You're laying there with your second daughter, who was born there in incarceration, and my dad's in the background weeping. Why is my dad weeping on that third week in August? It was because 2 weeks before then, the bomb was dropped in his home city. His grandmother who raised him, his friends that he went to high school with, the friends he would grow up with, his relatives were all vaporized.
Wow.
So my mom at that point was told by a nurse, your ikigai now is your husband. Guide him and your children. That is your purpose in life. And my mom stuck with that. So she
You said she was told by a nurse?
A nurse.
This is a Japanese American nurse?
Japanese, because they were in the war camps. And my mom.
Well, I understand that. I understand that. But when you said, I'm just trying to
sorry.
tie it all together, who this nurse was.
Japanese American nurse.
Okay.
And that stuck with my mom.
Yeah.
And so her ikigai became supporting her husband and guiding her children. So her ikigai for me was basically, she did not want me to be just another, and I can use this term, just another poor Japanese guy that would be unnoticed, that would be, basically with no self-confidence, especially after going through some of the things that we went through in high school, and elementary school. And so she wanted to make sure that did not happen to me. And her ultimate objective, she said, was so that I could build what they called a balanced humanity. Yeah. And she actually helped to define it. We defined it over the years together. She just called it a balanced humanity. And when I got older, I used to speak to her all the time. I've got all her journals. There's years missing, but her balanced humanity, I said, well, what does that really mean? She goes, people eventually became friends with me and we respected each other. So we kind of coined the term. So maybe a balanced humanity then is really an authentic reciprocity of friendship and respect. And she goes, yeah. She goes, that's all I looked for. I wanted that balanced humanity. And she found it. And because of her, I found it. I'm going to fast forward, for example. I was married once before. And if you can imagine, my late ex-father-in-law was in a prisoner of war camp in Japan for 3 years.
Okay.
So look at the parallels of this. Here's a guy that is
shot. Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's taking me a second to pull the push. Okay, your late ex-father-in-law was in a Japanese prisoner of war camp. Okay.
He was a Navy fighter pilot.
Okay.
Flew with the Grim Reaper team off the Enterprise, was shot down in Battle of Santa Cruz, and so spent 3.5 years in a prisoner of war camp in Japan. He flew with Jimmy Flatley's Grim Reaper team. On the other side of the world, my parents are in a prisoner of war camp for 3.5 years. Yes. And I am kind of like the point of the vector of this, in later years. So I get to see it from that standpoint, of my late ex-father-in-law, who actually came out and became the third squadron leader for the Blue Angels. And I used to fly him around in my plane off and on later, because when he couldn't fly, got some great stories out of him. And then my parents. Imagine here at this point a vector, and I asked myself, why did this vector come this way, where I have the direct insight of a prisoner of war in Japan, the direct insight of my parents, and it vectors me. And that's one of the other reasons why I believe what my mom gave me, this balanced humanity, this authentic reciprocity of respect and friendship. It was like all the points just came together. It's like that force of nature. I wanted to point out this balanced humanity also because when Dusty was and you can imagine, he went from 160, 180 pounds to when he finally was let out of the camps after the war, he was 88 pounds.
Wow.
He had survived it all. But Samuel, when some of the Japanese soldiers were up for war crimes, there was one soldier in there that actually was very civil to Dusty. His name was Commander Dusty Rhodes, Raleigh Rhodes, call sign Dusty Rhodes. When that sergeant was up for war crimes, Dusty actually wrote a 2-page letter to the Department of Justice, Department of Defense, suggesting that this sergeant should not be processed for war crimes.
Mm.
As bad as his treatment was, he felt it was unjust for the sergeant, Japanese sergeant, to be charged with war crimes, and that sergeant was not charged with war crimes.
Wow.
So that is part of what I look at in my book, Jap Girl, A Visual Immigrant in the Eyes of America, my mom's story of this balanced humanity and this vector point to see one side, the other side. But they both react. So they both moved beyond their mistreatments to excel in the world. And that's really, in many regards, when you and I first started talking, I thought, this is what we're asking our kids, is
Mhm.
to move on, to focus on yourselves and what you can do for yourselves and what you can do for society and how society potentially you can build that balanced humanity. And that's what my mom gave me from her ikigai. And
Mhm.
that's what my ikigai has come, is to build those accomplishments. But it enabled me to then talk to others and help others to see that, hey, you can overcome a lot of things. My parents were very strong believers in the American dream, and they passed that out to us, the kids. And they
So,
got us.
so your Dusty Rhodes, that was his name. Him and your parents spent time
They
off
they
each other.
they never had a chance to talk to each other,
Oh, okay.
but they knew of each other.
Okay. Okay.
My mom couldn't travel at that point, and but they knew of each other.
Okay.
So I think they talked once or twice right before we got married, but they were still two different worlds. But they lived with the same moral fabric, I guess is the best way to put it.
Hmm.
And I was kind of the linchpin, sort of in between on the vectors where they came together.
So when you came home to dinner, I mean,
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
I there was that actual, when I came home to dinner, there was an actual night like that when I came home to their house in Los Altos, and and on the way there, my then ex-wife said, "Well, yeah, my dad was in the war." I said, "Oh, what happened?" And I'd heard a little bit about his story, that he was a Navy fighter pilot and stuff. Well, he was in a prisoner of war camp, and I thought,
she told you that on the way to dinner.
and because I knew he had flown, but I didn't know anything about the prisoner of war thing, and I thought,
Oh,
I said, "Oh, this is going to be interesting," but he welcomed me with open arms.
okay. Okay.
And
That's
they actually wrote a book about him, which is actually out right now.
oh.
The book is called, if you don't mind me mentioning, that's
Go
okay.
ahead. Tell me whatever you want to do.
The book is called From POW to Blue Angel: the story of Commander Dusty Rhodes.
Oh, okay. I've heard the name before. I've heard that name. Well, I've heard it in wrestling.
Yeah, I was going to say, there's a wrestler named Dusty
But I
Rhodes.
did
Yeah.
hear, I do recall hearing about a Navy person named Dusty
Dusty
Rhodes.
Rhodes.
When you said it, it started percolating in my
Related.
brain.
Well, his significant given is Raleigh Ernest Rhodes, and but his call sign was Dusty Rhodes, and
Okay, okay.
but yeah, he flew. He actually converted the Blue Angels from a prop plane, the Grumman Bearcat, to the jet Panther jet for Grumman. So
Oh,
he took
wow.
his
So his history goes beyond World War II. He goes from the prop to jet planes, like you said, the Blue Angels, huh?
and then when the war broke out in Korea, he took his jet team to Korea. So he flew again in Korea combat.
Mhm. Okay.
So interesting guy, really really good person. So that's so kind of you sort of understand. So my whole it's when we talk about life, it's not just a career and overcoming what you call the monetary part of it. It's kind of coming to grace to yourself. I think we'll probably talk about this in some future episode, but my late wife, passed away from breast cancer, and I
Yeah.
know Samuel, you and I talked about some of that
Right.
loss.
Mhm.
I probably failed to mention that my late wife was also the former Miss Australia, and she
I
represented.
saw that looking like
Okay.
yeah, I saw that with two Miss Australians. I saw.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, because I was in Australia at that time. Yeah, I ran into the great story. So my late wife was Miss Australia, represented the Miss Australia. The Miss World competition is, I think, the oldest international beauty pageant. So
Mhm.
Stephanie represented them in 1969 at the Miss World competition there in London, England, at the Royal Albert Hall. And so when we were traveling through Australia, now back 13, 14 years ago, we were in Sydney, and we see this large church, and there's this big wedding going on. So we walk up to this one woman, the older woman. We said, because Stephanie would talk to everybody in Australia because everybody kind of knew her. And so even though this was many years later. The woman said, "Oh no, this is somebody's just big wedding." But she goes, "My daughter's somebody who's fairly well known." So her daughter comes up, and her daughter's half Jamaican and half English. I don't know if you could tell that from the picture.
Half
So
Jamaican, you said?
Jamaican, yeah.
Okay, okay, okay.
And so we're talking to her, and she goes, "Well, and so her daughter walks up. I think Frances was her last name. Yes. And so she's saying, "Oh, well, my daughter was Miss World, Australia, 2011." And Stephanie looks at her. She goes, "I was Miss World Australia in 1969." And they started talking. They got to know each other. So Samuel, the picture you saw is there, me in 2011. I'm sandwiched between two former Miss Australias of the Miss World competitions. And all my friends look at me that saw that, I think it was on Facebook, and they all said to me, they go, "You have to be joking. That's Okumoto standing between two Miss World Australias." And it was like I had all of our old friends, would call, would send me message on Facebook. They go, "You have to be kidding me," So
No with it.
yeah, so it's my life has been a little bit unusual that way.
To say the least. To say the least.
I always felt like I was Forrest Gump from the old movie, where I didn't do a lot, but I just happened to be there when things happened, kind of like
I
Forrest
was
Gump.
trying when I'm looking at your bio, I said, dang, there's a movie or something. I remember it was a guy that was like Richard. I couldn't, I can't, I haven't remembered it yet, but I'm not gonna worry about it.
Forrest Gump. And I just wanted to introduce this too. I worked in the technology industry, like at companies like Fairchild. Later, the two founders of Intel came out of Fairchild, and I was at Commodore Business Machines. And a lot of people don't know this, but uh, the Commodore Business Machines was one of the first PCs, along with Apple. And a young kid at 10 years old first cut his teeth on a Commodore computer and wrote a program and sold it for $500. And that's what kind of launched his interest in technology. And so that's why I felt like Forrest Gump. I said, "Well, I was a Commodore. I was a corporate controller there, and we were building these, small personal computers." Later, I found out that that Commodore computer influenced the life of one individual that changed the world. And that young individual was an African, South African. Do you know who that individual was or is?
We're not talking about Musk, are we?
Elon Musk. People tend to forget that Elon Musk was born in South Africa. He's
Oh, I haven't
African.
forgot. Matter of fact, I had an interesting conversation with people, and they'll say, "Yeah, so and so was African American," and I said, when I was working, I worked with this guy that came from South Africa and this guy that came from Nigeria.
Hmm.
And now the Nigerian guy was black and the South African guy was white. And the Nigerian, he doesn't call himself an African American. Or you got the white guy. I said, now people around here are calling themselves African American. I'm saying, so what am I supposed to call this guy? You know.
Right, right, right,
But, like I said, I don't fight people over that. That's not worth my energy. If that's what you
right,
want to call yourself. That's fine. But yes, for me, Elon Musk he became an American citizen, right?
right. He's
So
actually got three citizenships.
okay, well he's at least that.
Yep.
And he was born in South Africa. So then, hey, he's an African American. If anybody's one.
Right. And people don't acknowledge that because whites is back to what you and I've been talking about. Because
Yeah.
he's not a visual immigrant in the eyes of America. So he can be American.
Yeah,
Isn't
we
that crazy?
unfortunately live in a time where reality isn't real anymore. It's subjective. I guess this postmodern, woke, weird world
Yeah.
mentality. I think sometimes my mother died in '86, and I said something. If all of a sudden she was here for about a couple of days and seeing what was going on, she wouldn't have any clue as to what happened to you people. You know, you just
Yeah. I
probably
mean,
lost your minds or something.
you know, it was weird for me, taking back to the technology industry. I worked at Fairchild, and all the engineers there were white. I mean, let's get real, except one. And most people have never heard of this guy. And I luckily landed in a division at Fairchild Semiconductor, excuse me, where I got to work with this individual. Now, this individual, there's a group called the Homebrew Club. you think of the homebrew club as these early computer guys. It was like Steve Jobs was there and Wozniak was there, you know. So those are the guys you think of at the homebrew club. There was one guy that was in that homebrew club nobody ever talks about. His name was Jerry Lawson, and I got to work with Jerry in Fairchild Semiconductor. Jerry was one of the only. He was probably the only black engineer I met, you know, in Fairchild. Just imagine. But he's considered the father, the inventor of video cards, you know, individual cards for video games, because I was working in the video game division at the time.
Okay.
Great guy. But he was one of the greats, you know, in video games. You talk to any of these kids that are playing video games, you ever heard of Jerry Lawson? Nope. And so, but he was one of the amazing individuals and probably the only black engineer I knew at Fairchild. In fact, he might have been the only one. I just don't know. But that's, when I talk to a lot of the kids, like when I went to Mir and stuff, and they ask me, well, you know, this and this and this, I go, you don't realize back in 1975 when I was at Fairchild, Jerry was very highly thought of. He was part of the homebrew club. He was a part of all these guys that, you know, shaped the world of personal computers. And he was really well known for what he did, you know, with video games. But has anybody heard of him?
75. We're talking about what, Atari?
Before Atari. Atari had
before that, Pong.
See, we were building video games, you know, before we got out there before Atari did. Atari came out with their video cartridge games right after we was at Fairchild. They did a much better job. Nolan Bushnell did it, marketing it. But Jerry was in the forefront of all of that.
Okay.
So for those of you that are curious about that, Jerry Lawson he was amazing. And he was a fun guy to work with. He was really a fun guy. So I can see Samuel's probably looking him up right now, as he should. But Jerry Lawson, he was amazing. And so I had the honor and to actually work with him at Fairchild.
Well, that's interesting. Besides your technology work, you teach, or you were teaching.
So after a little over 30 plus years in the industry, I had some health issues with my neck, and so I broke my neck and some other issues. I really didn't want to do corporate work anymore, and so I was.
I'm sorry, Richard. You said something about a health thing, but I didn't catch it.
So back then I was having a lot of health issues with my neck and my shoulders. And
your neck and shoulder. Okay.
So eventually I retired out of corporate. It was just too much stress.
Is that from the Shotokan karate?
Combination of all of that, plus I was a hot dogs freestyle skier, and I did karate, and I did a lot of stupid things because I was, you know, thought I was indestructible. Proved wrong.
That was when we were 6. That was when we were 16. We were indestructible.
But I was still doing that into my 40s, and so because I was kind of stupid, and so I had my neck rebuilt, and that's when I kind of decided. Because I have 3 discs and a plate in my neck. But
when I was in my 40s, I was still lifting weights, and I'm talking about free weights. And I got a hernia, and after that, I said, Sam, your mind thinks that you're 20, but you're not 20 no more.
That's right.
So I quit all free weights after that. Now I have a total gym.
Yep.
I cycle. I went on treadmills this morning. I got mountains by me. I'll walk. I'll ride my bicycle. But all that muscular stuff for the young folks, I had to let it go.
That's it. See? Yeah, I had to quit doing, you know, free weights too. I used to work out with a guy named back in '71. He's the guy that took me up to my size. But another long story. But yeah, I quit doing free weights. I do all machines and stuff now because it's safer, number one. Plus, I'm older, and the joints just don't take it. But
the body can't take it no more.
Can't take it. But so yeah, I'm teaching. I was given the opportunity to teach in 2008 at San Jose State. So I ended up teaching there for about 11 years. And when I moved back to Southern California, I got a post. I've been teaching in Long Beach, Cal State Long Beach. I retired last year.
Well, what were you teaching?
I taught the MBA programs or graduate business programs.
Okay.
And I had, at that point, so you can imagine, the joke was I went back to school because I thought I better get some advanced degrees.
I was wondering, you taught what you going to school for?
Yeah. So I had the MBAs. I had undergraduate in accounting. I had done about half my MBA at San Jose State, but because of work, I got so busy I dropped out.
Okay.
And so, but I had done a lot of the work at that point. I had I had been a general manager for divisions. I had been a CFO for a number of public companies. I did an IPO, an initial public offering as a CFO. I was a whistleblower as a CFO. That my experience was captured in a Harvard Business Case Reviews that's used in schools all over. It's called the Midnight Journal Entry. And so that ethics case study, I've talked to schools that's used like in the USC School of Business, Marshall School, UCLA Anderson School.
Hmm.
It's used at Stern Business School at NYU. I just did a talk just this last Monday to the India School of Business in India. I just met with about 100 students there online to talk about my experience as a whistleblower in a public company, CFO.
Now, slow down. You're moving too fast because you said that.
Okay.
Now, you were a whistleblower?
I was a whistleblower in a public company in 2003. Based on my work, were the FBI, the Department of Justice, testifying in front of the grand jury of Oregon. We filed 17 that counts of criminal accounting fraud with the CEO and the controller who pled guilty to accounting fraud, criminal accounting fraud. A professor chronicled my experience in a case study, a Harvard Business Review case study called the Midnight Journal Entry.
So,
And
as a whistleblower, because we hear about the term every now and then.
right.
They say in certain aspects or certain businesses or whatever, the whistleblower is supposed to be protected. But then when you were blowing your whistle, you were still working for this organization or this company or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And they talk about protection, and this was ironically there was an act called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that was put into place in July of 2002. And so when I was a whistleblower in March of 2003, we were one of the first mid-sized companies that really fell under this jurisdiction. The larger companies like Enron and others, are well publicized, but companies like where I was at was not. And so when a case study professor, heard my story over dinner one night, she decided to write a case study on this.
Okay.
And so that case study, the Midnight Journal Entry, then is used as an ethics teaching case for a number of colleges and MBA programs. So,
How did your coworkers handle it?
well, many of my coworkers, especially in what we call the C-suite, a lot of the coworkers were removed, and half the VP staff was removed. I actually left voluntarily because I just didn't feel at that point that I could be effective. I got them through a lot of the lawsuit, got the criminal suits pulled together, and found my replacement, and then moved back from Oregon back to California.
Mm.
I was also getting, threats, physical threats, placed on me because people were not happy about this in the company because the stock had tanked and, other things had gone on. So it jeopardized, people's ability to work there because many of them did get fired. So I decided to leave Oregon and come back to California. So that's one of my interesting maybe experiences as a CFO in a public company.
As a whistle, when you first started, I'm not trying to get too deep into that thing, but when
Uh-huh.
you first started as a whistleblower, was
Yeah.
it was done anonymously? I mean, it was kept undercover, secret.
No, it had to be out in the front. I was the CFO at the time, and I had to
Oh, you just went up front public?
I had to. Public company. I had just been hired as the CFO. I found the accounting fraud in my first 30 days there. I had to bring it to the attention of the board. I had to bring it up. We had to make some public disclosures that we were delaying earnings. So it was, as a public company, you can't hide a lot of stuff you're not supposed to, number one.
So you just came in, grabbed the reins, and at that point you found out what was happening?
Yeah, I normally when I walk into a company, especially in that position,
Mhm.
I had a specific protocol that I would go through and check things, and within my protocol, I found some things, and extended that, and which came to light that we had a problem. So
Wow.
yeah, so that was interesting. So that was that was one of the more interesting parts of my career. Doing the
Okay.
initial public offering was good as a CFO, and I had done a number of startups in the early '80s. You learn from experience, as they say.
Mhm.
And during the '80s, I had a number of startups that failed.
Okay.
And because of that, I ended up losing everything in late 1985 to the point where I sold my condo. I was broke, and my parents said I couldn't come home to live in Southern California. I was in Silicon Valley. And so my dad said, "No, you're a man. You're going to figure this out." So I ended up living in cheap motels, couch surfing, living on the streets, living in my car. I held on to my gym membership so I could have a place to shower and brush my teeth.
Slow down, Richard.
Sorry.
I gotta go back to the parent thing.
Right.
You had lost. You I don't want to use that term. So you rolled the dice. You invested. It crashed and burned.
Yep. And so
And you wanted to go home and rebuild or whatever. And they said no. Is that a cultural thing? Or what is that where dad said no?
I think a lot of that was because of my dad, by the way my dad grew up. Because he
Okay.
grew up on his own. He was, at the age of 4, was shipped back to Japan to be raised by his grandmother. Didn't have parents, was kind of an outcast, but, sort of fought his way to grow up. Comes back to America, fighting his way again through racial discrimination now, trying to get started, not lacking education. And so he felt like my dad was 5'2", by the way, and my mom was 5'1". So, my dad looked at me and said, at the time I'm 34, I've gone to college. And he said, "You're going to figure this out. You're not coming home." He was right. I look back on those days, and he taught me a lot.
What did you think about it at the time?
At that time, I actually thought it was the right thing.
You did?
Yep. Because, I thought about it, and I thought to myself a couple of things. If I move back to Southern California, it's going to be hard to find a job up north. So in that regard, he was also right. So I rationalized it that way.
Okay.
But I also thought about it and said, he did stand on his 2 feet. At that point in time, I had watched my father be crippled when I was 10, spent 10 years to learn how to walk again, held on to that leg, even though they wanted to amputate it. And I looked at his resilience. And so by his own example.
You're sneaking in stuff, Richard, without explaining. I know you said your father in 1962 was crippled, in a car accident.
Right.
But I don't remember you talking about it took him 10 years to learn how to walk again. And
Yeah.
they wanted to amputate his leg.
Yep. The night that he was in the accident was compound fractures. He was crushed between 2 cars. The doctors wanted to amputate his leg. And so for years, they fought not to amputate the leg because it sounds terrible. It would have been cheaper medically to do that. So instead, he went through 9 operations over about a 10-year period to hold on to that leg. I remember days after one operation, he'd have a cast on it. He'd have these silver bars going through there. He was walking on his crutches down the hallway, and they started to bleed, and he started screaming with excruciating pain. And yeah, those are my formative years from about the age of 10 to about 19 when I moved out.
It's amazing when I look at the situation, and we're not going to get into the COVID time and how it changed my perspective on the medical industrial industry. To think, even back then, they were looking at, well, it'd be a lot cheaper if we just cut his leg off instead of doing what we could do to try to save this man's leg so he can walk.
Right. And at that time, prosthetics weren't that good. So my dad really fought hard to save that leg, and my mom was right there supporting him. So
her ikigai.
Her ikigai was to basically support her husband, and that's what she did.
And he was able to eventually walk relatively well again.
Exactly. In fact, he always had an oversized heel on that right shoe because the leg was an inch and a half shorter because of the bone loss. Okay. But he actually went back to gardening, light job gardening jobs, certain things he couldn't do and he could do. But he wanted to be outside again. That was one of the key things that drove him crazy. He couldn't be outside as much as he was before.
Okay. Yeah. So you were, okay, I got to figure it out. Yep. Dad said no.
Yeah. And he said no. And January through about, I guess I finally got a job in August. So it was about 8 months I lived on the streets like that. My sister took me in up there for about 2 weeks. I didn't want to overstay my welcome. And then for the first 2 weeks and thereafter, I just did wherever I could to stay someplace. So when I was short on money, I'd get some odd jobs to make a little bit of money back then.
Now you said you stayed in your car sometime?
I had a Volkswagen Bug at the time. And so sometimes when I knew I wasn't going to have enough money, I would just say, okay, well, I'm just going to find a vacant parking lot to sleep in my car.
And you can't sleep too good in that thing.
No, I can remember this really well. In the Bug, I would push the front seats all the way forward. I'd fold them forward, and I would kind of sleep crunched up like this in the back, and I did that many nights. And some days when I got up, like a part-time gig or something, doing some construction work or something, I would go stay, and I'll never forget this. It was a cheap motel. I won't mention the name. It was in El Camino Real in Santa Clara, and that was $172.50, I think, for every 2 weeks. And
Oh,
I stayed there because they had a hot plate and a refrigerator, so I could actually cook in the room. I don't think you were supposed to do that, but I did.
a hot plate in the refrigerator. That's a lot cheaper than going out buying food every day.
Yep. And so I did that, and then after that, I got a job, and it made me much better in business because I hate to say this, but I became more realistic and more cutthroat. And cutthroat from the standpoint, I was there to survive the business. And so I did the right things, but I was a lot tougher. And Dad was right. It made me a lot tougher.
So you at that point in time, was that you had already had your MA?
I did not have my MBA. I had an undergraduate degree. I did not finish my MBA.
Okay.
So when I started teaching in 2008, I thought to myself, man, if I'm teaching here, I really need to get an advanced degree.
Okay.
So in 2009, I went to Gonzaga, and they had a great program. I could do part-time up there, part-time here, in the Bay Area. And so I went to get a master's in communications because I figured I've done enough work. I know a lot of the disciplines in business. I don't want to get my MBA now. So I got my master's in communications, and the joke was, you'll appreciate this, I wanted to complete it before I turned 60. So I graduated from Gonzaga in 2011, just made it. The joke. Imagine here I am in graduate school up there, everybody's going around, and all my classmates are like in their late 20s and 30s, and they're telling me, oh, what do they want to do with their degree? When do they want to do a degree? And I just stood up and said, I just want to graduate before I turn 60. And the whole room looks at me and they go, what do you mean? So I told them my age, and they go, oh. So luckily I did. I graduated before I turned 60 in 2011.
Okay.
And then I started teaching more, and then I thought, if I'm really going to be serious about this, I need to get my doctorate. So in 2013, I applied to a couple of programs, and I got into my doctorate program in 2014. And so I was in the program, years go by. And finally, I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, I'm coming to the end of the 7 years, and my dissertation's almost done. I'm thinking, I got to get this thing done before I turn 70. And so here's the old joke again, Samuel. So I'm talking to my classmates and saying, I got to finish this. I got to get approved on my dissertation before I turn 70. And people are laughing about this. They don't know my age, right? And I told them, no, I got to finish this before I turn 70.
Right.
So luckily in 2021, in October of 2021, I actually, finished it. And it actually was awarded my doctorate in 2022 before I turned 70. So I just made it,
So what do you want to do now?
So then I thought, well, I never finished my MBA. And so I thought, since they have these online programs, I applied. And so right now I'm in the MBA program at Boston University, and my target is hopefully to graduate in 2025. I'm really shooting to be the oldest graduate of the MBA program there. Hopefully then I'll be 73. So I'm hoping I'll be the oldest. I got to set some kind of,
So that's your goal now, to be the oldest graduate of the MBA
program at Boston University. I know that sounds a little crazy, but back to your thing. Yeah, I taught for about 15 years. I retired out of teaching at Cal State Long Beach last year, but I'm still working with them on some release time to help them develop their online MBA program. I actually launched the online MBA program in 2019 for them. I was the director for their online MBA program for a couple of years, and then they decided, unfortunately, my late wife got really ill. I needed to spend more time there, and unfortunately, she passed away during that time period. So it's been a journey, to say the least. Yeah, it's been a journey, but I'm not done yet.
No. So when did you decide that you were going to fly?
I was flying. Well, actually, when I was in college, a lot of my roommates, because San Jose State had a great aeronautics program, so a lot of my roommates were pilots.
Okay.
And so when I was a senior in college there, I was working at Levitt's Furniture as a warehouseman, but then my roommate got me a job in doing some bookkeeping and accounting, because I was an accounting major, my senior year at the airport, working for what they called an FBO, fixed-based operator, Piper. So I started my flying career there.
Okay.
And I ran out of money because I'm a poor college student, and I had to start paying back my loans once I graduated college, because I actually paid back my college loans.
You too.
Yep, I paid back my college loans. So I quit flying for a long time, and then back in sort of the 90s when I had some money, I started flying again, got my license.
Okay.
And at that point, my best friend, who was a pilot, his father was also a pilot for United, part of
Mhm.
that Pan Am, was killed in a plane crash in 1993
Oh, wow.
when he was 40. I was 41 at the time, but I kept flying. And then I met, that year I met, actually it was prior to that year, 2 years prior to that, I had met my then first wife, and her father was Commander Rhodes. And so in later years when Dusty couldn't fly, I would fly him in my airplane. I quit flying. Dusty passed away in 2007, and I just quit flying after that. I sold my airplane and just quit flying.
Okay.
But I had put in 400 or 500 hours at that point as a pilot.
It just lost interest, or because of the death
Well,
of your friend? Or...
yeah, I figured at that point I had lost my best friend to an airplane crash. Dusty at that point had gone. And I just felt like I lost my interest in flying after that point.
Well, you
And I
don't
felt
even get up there if you ain't interested, because you got to pay attention to what you're doing.
absolutely, and I just felt like, I felt like Dusty told me something once. We were laughing because I had taken him on a flight out of San Jose, Reed Hillview, where my plane was tied down. We flew into a Hollister airport, and as I landed there, we were walking by a hangar, and we saw this guy getting this P-51 Mustang, getting
Oh,
ready for a race. And Dusty had flown the Grumman Bearcat, which also now they have a race car called the Rare Bear, which is a great plane for racing. And he was talking to the pilots and stuff like that. And the pilots there were telling him what great pilots they were. And so we walked away from there, and we were going to grab breakfast at the airfield down in Hollister. I said, Dusty, why didn't you mention that you were a flight leader for the Blue Angels and all that stuff? And he said, Richard, he goes, I was shot down in World War II. And he goes, I guess I wasn't that great a pilot. I started laughing. He goes, okay. So we start laughing about that. And he goes, so I asked him one time, I said, well, how did you feel about that? Because you survived all this. He goes, what you realize is when your number's up, your number's up. And he says, sometimes you just don't want to push the limits. And that kind of rang to me in 2007. I thought, I had been flying a long time, and I thought, I don't want my number to be up. So at that point, I just said, maybe it's time to quit. So I just quit.
that's interesting, because I didn't never fly, but I retired from working in 2017. I was a property manager, shopping centers and stuff. I had to climb roofs a lot of the time. And many of the roof hatches were on the outside of the building. And I never liked climbing roofs, but I had to do it. And I got to the point where I said, I got one time to fall off a ladder.
Yeah.
Just that one time, and I won't get a second chance. So I started getting to the point where I don't want to climb roofs no more. I don't want to. I didn't want to do the job because I was on like a 24-hour 7. It was never a situation where it's just 8 to 5. And I hated the rain too, because if it rained, I was the person they called, and they're looking for a roofer. And so I got to the point where I hated rain. I didn't want to do roofs. And then once I realized I was approaching 65, and I saw what my Social Security would be, I saw what other money was, and I said, dang, you know what? I can live. I don't have to deal with this stuff. So
there you go.
And I knew friends that said, well, I'm gonna stay till I'm 70. And I said, no, I'm gonna leave right now. I'm through with this. And I never regretted making that decision, because like I said, I don't even want to climb my roof on my house. So that, and I'm not even talking about an airplane. I'm just talking about just hitting the concrete, or like where I live in Arizona, I have a rock yard. I just don't want to hit the ground, period. So I understand the mindset.
I agree with you. I mean, you reach a point where, you just look at it and go, I got some better things I still want to do,
That's it. I'm glad I'm functional. I can run. I can do a lot of things that a lot of my friends can't do anymore. And I thank the Lord for it. I don't take it for granted. So I just try to, keep moving. And I try to exercise this thing up here as much as I try to exercise the rest of my body, because if this thing atrophies, the rest of it is toast.
It's got to go. It's got to go hand in hand. I agree with you. I mean, it's like I still work out 3 days a week on machines, not so much free weights. I get in some other sports because I can't ski anymore. I can't do karate anymore. So I've taken up, I hate to say an old man's game, but I took up golf. I actually played with Teddy Chino a couple days ago.
Oh, hey, Ted, tell him I said hi. I haven't talked to Ted in in a while.
he's
I
still
need I need to
he's
reach out to Ted.
he's a good man. You know, he's still Ted. He's still kind of quirky and smart, but and
Quirky and smart. That
that's
sounds like Ted.
that's Ted. He hasn't changed, and he's just matured into it, and he's really good at it now.
Yeah, Ted's a great guy. So,
It's really it's strange though, Sam, because I think about it. You talked about the early days. Um, I saw James Thompson, JT, in a concert a couple of years ago. He
oh,
he was out here, you know, he's living in Italy as a jazz musician. And
mhm.
you know I saw at that concert, we cooked up again was Billy Williams and Melvin Mercer.
Yeah. I
It was
see
weird.
Billy and Melvin. James blocked me from Facebook several years ago. We had a disagreement
Oh, man, that's too bad.
on theology.
Uh,
Um, I try not to get people upset, uh, but I seem to have a habit of doing it. And whether somebody agree with me or not, particularly if I grew up with them and they were friends, I don't want to make them mad or alienate them. 'Cause James and I were very close when we were in elementary school.
I
But
remember it.
he's gotta you
He's
gotta
got
take
that.
it. That's okay. I'm glad he's still doing well. I know he's been living in the elderly for quite some time now.
Yeah,
So
he's still playing with Zucchero and his band and stuff, and, off and on, I'll ping JT, see what he's up to, and, but
mhm.
yeah, so it's amazing because you think back on that, you know, Chris Rodriguez was back there, and John Idoni, I just talked to John not too long
Mhm.
ago, couple
Well,
couple
hold
weeks
on
ago.
a second, Richard.
Uh-huh.
We can talk about a little bit of stuff off here real quick.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to. I think, I think we've covered just about everything we were going to cover, unless there's something you wanted to cover that I didn't get to.
No, I think, you know, you got it. I mean, I apologize that I've been telling you about all these crazy parts of my
No,
life.
no, that's what I want. I mean, and you gave me plenty of stuff that I didn't know about. Uh, I just, like I said, just trying to circle all the way back to the beginning. I wanted people to know, particularly Black people, to know, that think or have been indoctrinated by the ideology that we were the only one that went through something.
Oh, yeah.
We're not the only one that went through something. Everybody went through something. I can get into, you talk about the potato famine in Ireland and a bunch of stuff that a bunch of white folks went through,
Yep.
or when the Italians came up there and the Brittany and all this other stuff. But I'm not trying, everybody went through something at one point or another.
Right,
The Bible
right.
says in Galatians 3 and 28, there is neither Jew nor Greek, and there is neither slave nor free, there is no male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Now, for us Christians, the idea is we're united by God and His blood. I don't care what you look like, because when it comes to the end, you know, it's either, I joke with my Christian friends, particularly my Black ones. They say, well, okay, when we go to heaven, is there going to be a Black section up there? Where all the Black Christians are going to meet? Hey, if God is God and He say who He is and He did what He did, and it's His blood, we're all together, we're all one. And,
Yep,
and that's the way that folks need to look at it. And
yep,
as far as the young people is concerned, I would ask any young person that's watching this or has watched this, don't be dismayed by the crap.
yep,
We've lived through crap. You're gonna live through crap, and past generations lived through crap. The only thing is, don't let the crap slow you down. Move
absolutely.
forward and give it everything you got. Because I'm fully convinced we haven't reached a point yet in this country, and I pray we never do, that whatever you put in it, you're going to get out of it. It might take a while. Richard's a prime example of it. You put it in there, you're going to get it out. This idea that the white man's holding me back, and I used to tell people that, oh, the white man's holding me down. I said, well, get out from under him. And
Yep,
the only person that's really going to hold you back is you. You may not get what you want, you may not get it the way you want it, but you're going to get something. Like your parents, your father came back from 10 years of dealing with learning how to walk, and that was on besides all the other crap he had to experience. And
yep,
then your mother, and the stuff that she had to deal with, and them finding each other in an internment camp, and then they live 60 years together. I mean, that says a heck of a lot. That says a lot about their fortitude. That says a lot about the love that they brought together. That says a heck of a lot about them as people. But even when they came out of that thing and had to deal with stuff, they still dealt with it. And like I said, from her, she implanted in you this desire to move forward, to don't let nothing hold you back.
Right.
and you got to meet a woman whose dad was in a concentration camp, and and bond with him.
Yep.
So we can get along. We can bond with anybody and do anything if we put our mind to it. Richard, I want you to hold on for a second.
Okay.
I want to just sign off, and I
Okay.
just want to thank everybody for tuning in. And this is the end of Manly Monday, and